Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. If you've been keeping an eye on the markets lately, or honestly just noticing all the new solar panels popping up in your neighborhood, you know that renewable energy is absolutely exploding globally. But behind that massive boom is a really fascinating, meticulously planned industrial strategy. Today, we're going to unpack the source material to see exactly how this incredible macroeconomic shift played out over the last 20 years.
Okay, let's dive right into this. How did one single country manage to build the entire green energy supply chain? That is the central mystery we're exploring today. Because look, a transformation like this, it doesn't just happen overnight. It was a deliberate move that has fundamentally reshaped the global energy economy.
To really wrap our heads around this, we need a blueprint. So, we'll start with the green energy giant, move on to their 20-year master plan, and then look at how they secured the supply chain. After that, we'll examine the domestic competition crucible, see how they're driving down global costs, and finally, we'll take a hard look at the new global reality.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the green energy giant, and how all this became a strategic national priority. You see, the foundation for everything we're looking at today was actually laid all the way back in the 2000s. That's when the government explicitly identified things like solar, wind, batteries, and electric vehicles as major strategic priorities. But here's the thing. They didn't just sit back and cross their fingers hoping the free market would figure it out. No, they actively built a massive safety net to reduce the risk for companies. We're talking huge subsidies, incredibly cheap loans from state-owned banks, tax incentives, and deep support for R&D. Basically, if you were a manufacturer, the state essentially subsidized your early risks so you could just go out there and innovate as fast as humanly possible.
And that brings us right into Section 2, a 20-year master plan and the sheer importance of playing the long game.
A safety net only really works if it actually stays there, right? Unlike a lot of other nations where energy policies kind of fluctuate wildly with election cycles, this strategy was pursued consistently over multiple decades. It builds across a very specific timeline. First, Phase 1, build out the core manufacturing factories. Then, Phase 2, create massive domestic demand to keep those factories humming. Phase 3, once your domestic market makes you a giant, you achieve global scale. And finally, Phase 4, you take that unparalleled scale and export it to the rest of the world. It's essentially a brilliant sequential chain reaction.
But hey, you can't build all those factories out of thin air. You need materials, which leads us to Section 3, securing the supply chain and creating an ecosystem advantage.
If you're going to fuel a master plan of this scale, you absolutely need the raw ingredients. We're talking lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. And rather than just waiting around for the global market to provide them, Chinese firms were super proactive. They aggressively invested in mines and processing facilities far beyond their own borders. Just think about the geographic spread here. They made strategic investments in Australia, Chile, Indonesia, and all across Africa. They literally locked in their supply security right at the source.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how they handled those materials once they actually secured them. Take batteries, for example. They didn't just want to assemble the final product at the very end. They wanted to own the entire chain, from the initial lithium processing to manufacturing the cathode and anode materials, to building the cells, and finally putting together the battery packs. By owning literally every single stage of that process, they completely stripped out the middlemen, insulated themselves from global supply shocks, and drastically slashed their costs.
And get this, all of this production is clustered into a highly optimized geographic footprint. On the one hand, you have the standard global model, right? Distant, delayed logistics where parts are crossing oceans for weeks. Contrast that with this localized manufacturing ecosystem. Thanks to incredibly dense networks, efficient ports, and a really skilled workforce, a solar manufacturer might source almost all of their components within just a few hundred kilometers. That massive reduction in shipping delays and logistics costs, it's an absolute game changer.
Let's transition over to Section 4, the domestic competition crucible.
Because it wasn't just about manufacturing things, they created an absolute furnace of demand and intense rivalry back home. Remember step 2 of that master plan we talked about. China became the world's largest installer of renewable tech. But here is the critical insight. Rather than just picking a single national champion to fulfill all that demand, the state supported multiple firms simultaneously, giants like CATL, BYD, Longi, and Jinko Solar. These companies were thrown into this intense, cutthroat crucible of competition. They were literally forced to innovate relentlessly and aggressively lower their prices just to survive.
Which brings us right to Section 5, driving down global costs and the unbelievable power of scale.
So what happens when you combine that massive domestic demand with intense competition and a perfectly optimized supply chain? Well, you become an absolute expert in automation and economies of scale. And the result of that expertise is perfectly summed up by one staggering statistic: 80%. Battery costs alone have dropped by more than 80% since the early 2010s. This wasn't just some minor market tweak. This was a complete rewriting of the economics of energy, and solar panel prices experienced a very similar dramatic collapse.
This specific cost reduction is what changed the game for all of us. We went from an era where going green was this expensive, niche alternative to today's reality of accelerated mainstream global adoption. Those lower prices, manufactured through that massive ecosystem we just talked about, are fundamentally what accelerated the aggressive global shift toward renewables that we are all witnessing right now.
And that leads us directly to our final section for today, the new global reality.
We've seen the blueprint, we've seen the execution, and this brilliantly illustrates exactly where things stand today. Across all four major pillars of green energy, the market share is just staggering. They hold most of the global production in solar panels, a large majority in lithium-ion batteries, major global shares in wind turbines, and they've built the world's largest EV industry. This right here is the ultimate culmination of everything, from securing those lithium mines in Australia all the way to surviving those intense domestic rivalries.
To really synthesize this entire analysis, our source material offers this one incredibly powerful summary. China became the leader in renewable energy manufacturing by combining state support, huge domestic demand, complete supply chains, aggressive scaling, and intense industrial competition over 2 decades. That single sentence perfectly encapsulates this master machine.
So, I want to leave you with a question to really ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. What does this 2-decade blueprint mean for the future of global energy? As other nations look to build out their own manufacturing capabilities and transition to clean power, they are navigating a world that has been fundamentally shaped by the exact strategy we just explored. It is going to be a fascinating road ahead, and I really hope this deep dive gave you a clearer lens to view it all through. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.